I want to thank Leslie for inviting me here to speak to you. It's been a while since I told my story and what you're going to hear today, so I probably will be very emotional about it. It's a really raw and really difficult story, but I hope that I honour God in it. I hope that you hear God through it. And we're going to begin. My name is Heather Elizabeth Bell. And I am coming 43. I was born in August 24th, 1977, just 10 days after Elvis Presley died. I asked my mum to give me some memories of when I was born, but she said, Heather, the king had just died and nobody remembers anything. I'm married to Keith Johnston Bell, and I moved to the sticks called Dundrod, just beyond Nuts Corner towards Lisburn. On the 1st of August, tomorrow, on the 1st of August 2009, and I'm going into my 21st year teaching in Ulidia Integrated College. I am the head of RE there, and it is my absolute privilege to bring the gospel and Jesus to thousands and thousands and thousands of pupils who have passed through my door. It's been a real honour and a real privilege. But when I married in 2009, I think I was like any other 32-year-old who married. I had met the man of my dreams. We were quite different. I was very fiery and he was particularly placid. I don't think that Keith and I, you would have picked us out in the crowd and put us together, but we did just over a year of dating, and we wrestled out really difficult stuff, and I allowed him to love me. And for the first year of our marriage, we had just a brilliant, godly, fun marriage. And then we began thinking about having children. And that's where I felt that darkness fell. We quickly realised as the months passed that conception for us might not just be as easy as maybe Keith had thought. I had a niggling suspicion somewhere that conception might not just be so easy, but we did conceive. And unfortunately, while I was at school teaching, I miscarried, and that was a traumatic experience. My Woodlands family rallied, my own family rallied, and my friends rallied, and I picked myself up, and Keith picked himself up, and we began trying again for a family. But after a while we went to our doctors, and it was a very difficult conversation, not because the doctor made it difficult, just because we were facing the reality of infertility. So when we went to specialists, we were very blessed to be able to go to specialists just because we were financially able to do that. And when we went to specialists and had all the tests, we realised that there was no blame anywhere, that I had no egg reserve and would never have children, and Keith would never give me children. And that day was a very harsh reality, and so we began our NHS journey, and we were added to a list, and we realised that we would have to have a very intricate form of IVF where they used a glass tip needle and injected into an egg that they could find. And that began, and the Royal were absolutely brilliant, but it was a difficult time because everyone sat in a waiting room, not knowing whether they were there to give their sperm, not knowing whether they were there to test how many follicles they had, not knowing which part of anybody's journey it was. And I too remember those times when I sat in the fertility clinic right beside the door of the maternity unit with my head down, wishing my head wasn't down and wishing I could get alongside people because I was so terribly lonely as a female. And as we sat in the Royal and we went through the first process, I got a very poor result on very strong medication, and our first IVF, where we were so filled with hope, ended with a failure. It ended with just me bleeding, and we kind of laid down tools and let our inner circle in, and we worshipped. And we worshipped. And our bedroom became somewhere where my husband and I lay with our faces down and we worshipped God. And I knew my memory is so poor. I now know it's because I'm iron deficient permanently for lack of loving red meat. But I knew that I wanted to journey our IVF, and so someone gave me a book and I began to write. And on Sunday the 23rd of September 2014, I wrote, I have reached surrender. Yesterday and today, I'm trying, I'm depending on the Holy Spirit, and I just say, please God. I'm asking, I'm petitioning, I'm not begging. I know God hears me. And at the end of every day, I thank God for listening to me. And at the bottom of this, I say, I'm having good times with my husband. And I continue a diary, I continue a difficult diary. And the recommendation of my family after a failure of IVF is that I quickly pick myself up. My husband picks himself up and we phone the necessary people. And I remember phoning the necessary people and we get ourselves back on a list. We gather £4,500, £5,000. We get ourselves tested again and we start our journey. But we were recommended by a Dr. Traub who brought IVF to Northern Ireland. We were recommended by him that the damage done with a failed IVF takes you to such an emotionally low place that, number one, you have to wait until you build up your emotions significantly, maybe not back to where they were. And number two, you wait until either of the partners has caught up. And I always thought I would race ahead and I would call Keith behind me. But the damage that is done when the potential for life fails is really, really shattering, and it's very traumatic. And I imagine it's as traumatic as breast cancer, and I imagine it's as traumatic as financial ruination, and I imagine it's as traumatic as domestic violence. For me, the loneliness and the heartache of not being able to carry a biological child was shattering. And so Keith and I spent many nights on our bedroom floor with a big bedroom with our faces down and worship music on. And Keith began to declare things. He began to unwrap all the bandages from Lazarus in the tomb, and he began to declare life in our old farmhouse. And we began to research our farmhouse, and there has never been life in our farmhouse. The people in the generations before us have never had children live in our farmhouse. So we've a brilliant couple from church. They came, and if you know the Gypsy Kings, they brought a guitar and they began to worship God and just play music and sing and praise and worship God. And I always remember, to me, it sounded like my childhood when the Gypsy Kings were on a radio in the background in my kitchen in Ballyclare. But this was a beautiful worship, a passionate worship. And we had godly people around us. We had people praying. When we could only groan, we knew we had people praying for us. We knew we had young couples who already had children praying for us. We knew we had parents and grandparents praying for us. We knew we had mums of people who had grandchildren praying for us. We knew we were covered, and we also knew that we had surrendered it to God. So we visited the private clinic again, and we began our second IVF journey. We had gathered 3 little embryos and we had frozen them from our first cycle, but we were given devastating news that the 3 embryos should not be used. My own natural reserve should be used as soon as possible, because as the months went by, I was losing any natural chance to have a family. And we began again. And I got the very highest dose and collected the highest dose and began. And I have written day number 1, I'm just going to read it to you. Tuesday the 6th of November, so it took us from September to November to start again. IVF number 2. I have had nosebleeds and a metallic taste in my mouth. But today, my period has arrived, and IVF number 2 begins. I've no real pain in my heart, more a reality that we begin the hard journey again. Perhaps it's easier as I know what lies ahead. My friend, my beautiful friend Ruth, has given me encouragement, and she says, Heather, you will have fruit. And she says this is a plural. This is not a fruit. You will bear fruit. Keith is not hearing. He's tired of the prophetic with no, quote, fruit. It's almost funny. My first pill is taken. It might make me queasy like the last time. Lord God, it's still about you. Pour out your grace. And we began IVF number 2, and at 2 ended with no pregnancy. Early one morning the following August, I had already decided that I didn't want it to interfere with Lydia. It wasn't fair on A-level pupils. It wasn't fair just the strain in the background, and so I transferred a milk churn of 3 beautiful embryos from the Royal Victoria Hospital where they had been stored, and I moved them to a private clinic, and I gave £100 over at the door, and they said they would prepare my cycle and they would give me a call. And it was halfway down the stairs on an early August morning when I got a phone call, and they said, could you be here in half an hour? And Keith and I picked ourselves up, and when we'd reached the clinic, they were already thawing the embryos, and they said, Heather, we have 3 embryos, but one of them looks to be dying, but we'll put the other 2 in and we'll watch the 3rd. And as they put the 2 in, Keith prayed over me and I prayed, and we did another length of time during the summer holidays, and then I had to do a test. Sometimes when you do IVF you don't need to test because unfortunately it all just comes away and that's your reality. But on Monday the 21st of August, I write, Keith asked me to sleep until 7:30 a.m, but I didn't get past 6:20. I did a test with him and I went back to bed. It was very dark and very intense when I looked at the test, and there were 2 beautiful red lines. I thanked God, I praised God, and we wept. I phoned my mum and my sisters, and Keith phoned his family. We have no words. Here we go, Lord. That pregnancy ended up becoming the reality of having 2 beautiful young girls. Many years before that, I had gone round at church at Christmas time. I'd gone round at the Dunsilley Hotel at a Christmas do, and there was a red bauble on everybody's table, and on the red bauble there was a little note, and it said, for unto us a child is born, ... unto us a son is given. And at the end of the evening I took them all and I created a Christmas tree full of these red baubles, and I put them everywhere. I put them over light switches. I took one to my classroom, and when I gave birth to Miriam Joy Bell, and when I gave birth to Elizabeth Olive Bell on the 2nd of April 2014, I said, God, where is this boy? And I went home and I later spoke to Keith. And I said to Keith, I don't think I feel biologically finished. The 3rd embryo had naturally died. And he looked at me and he said, Heather, we can't do this again. You can't do this again. We can't do this again. And I knew we couldn't, but I just put it out there. And on the 7th of June, the following year, I gave birth to Priscilla Gloria Bell, a beautiful water birth and a beautiful restoration, not only because we love Elvis Presley, but Priscilla, surprise, surprise, Cilla Black, or Priscilla the prophetess in the Bible. And as I journeyed on with Priscilla, I began to get that metallic taste in my mouth again. And I wondered whether, for unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given. And the following year, on the 20th of September, I gave birth to Judah David Bell, all 8 pounds and 4.5 ounces of him. And when I brought Judah Bell home, we gave birth at 4 a.m. in the morning, and when I brought him home, before church had even started, I got out of the car at 11 o'clock, and before my church had even started, 1 minute past 11, I got a text from my friend Eileen, and she just said, "We've just heard your wonderful news." And when I walked into my living room, I had 4 children under 2.5. 2 of them out of nappies. Thank God, £66 of a direct debit to Amazon every month on nappies alone. And I had the family that I had only ever dreamt of. There were dark, difficult days that still lay ahead. I did feel the isolation of a long winter after the 20th of September, 4th baby. I did feel the strain of every chicken pox and every illness, of every conjunctivitis, of every raw nappy rash. I did feel it when Miriam had terrible reflux. I did feel it when Judah had silent reflux for 19 weeks. I felt it all, and I know that when God restores everything that the locusts have eaten, I know that that is still difficult. But I thank God, and I stand as testimony to the fruit, to the immeasurably more that God has given Keith and I. Keith got our twins on his 40th birthday. I got a family that I only ever dreamt of. Every day, 5 or 6 times a day, I thank God for this beautiful family. I shout it from the rooftops, the goodness of God. What do I say if God had never blessed me with a family of 4? I say that I hope that I would have had the grace to remember that I had surrendered at the first IVF journey, to remember that I had said, "God, you are enough." When Keith had said and wrestled it out that adoption was a route that we would possibly have to investigate, it reached the stage where I had to say, "I'm sorry, Keith, I want a biological child, and I don't think I could do the adoption process." And that was humiliating and embarrassing and difficult to wrestle out, but I had to be honest. I can say that in the journey that I've had, I was never closer to God than when I did the journeys of IVF. I have read and reflected on this diary, and I'm quite not ashamed, I'm quite shocked. Perhaps my relationship with God in these days where I have all that I've ever dreamt of. And it's been a hard and a beautiful reminder that in those difficult times, I was so tight with God. I'm looking now at my resurrection year. People praying for me, "God, you're my refuge, you're my shelter. Pouring out your grace. Hallelujah, our God reigns." It goes on and on and on. And today, I see my need to sort my relationship with God out and not be so dependent in those difficult times, but turn to God in all that I do. And before coming to record this, I'd spoken to my sister Laura, who always laughs and jokes, and said, she had no problem having a family. But I said to her, "Laura, how will you listen to this? How will you, is this a waste of my time? Is this just my story and nobody else really can relate to it?" And she said, "Heather, we never really knew what to say. We never really knew how to encourage you, and this will be an insight for her and many others like her who were in the fortunate position to be able to conceive children. This will give her and others a bit of insight into the journey of infertility. I wrote some things down when I was thinking about things perhaps that people could say or shouldn't say to me and to people like me. I didn't find so many things that shouldn't be said. You know, it's obvious, it'll be okay is not a great thing to say. It'll all work out is not ideal either, or any sign of a family, any sign of children. That was just a difficult question. Things to say, perhaps sort of turning it and just saying, actually, this is something more positive. You could say, if you're doing life with somebody who's in a situation like I was, I would recommend you ask if you care. I recommend you keep the conversation real. I recommend honesty. I wanted you to be honest, and I would have allowed you on the journey if you cared and if you wanted the journey. And I would say that sincerely commit to pray. And even if you feel that committing to pray that people like me would have a family is too much for your faith, then just pray that, you know, that we would experience God and that we would experience wisdom and peace and God's grace. I would say get alongside someone like me if you feel the nudge, and if you don't even know what the nudge looks like, it's just a real ruffling in your spirit, a real when you don't think you should be thinking about the person and you think about the person, just that you feel not burdened in a bad way, but really burdened to pray for the person. Then I recommend that you listen to that nudge and you get alongside people like me. You text me, you lift the phone, you speak life over me, you tap me on the shoulder on an occasion in Tesco's when you're not having to socially distance, and you start a conversation with me and you commit to pray. I just written down, what was my attitude to God? I was real with God. I kicked and thumped and stamped. I was cross, and God could cope with that. Did I abandon God? No. Why? Because God did not abandon me. Thank you for listening.